To continue where I left off, I'm going to be talking about generational trauma. Now, why am I speaking on generational trauma? Because I have had personal experience and personal generational trauma, and also from talking to relatives and asking them, do they believe in it, that it is a real thing. Now, a lot of people may not know it's a thing, and I'm here to explain that it is real. Now, the information that I found and the information that I gathered from asking family members and also reading short stories and memoirs and also reading articles is that it's a lot deeper than what you would think it would be. It could also be a cause of, of what a family member has and why a family member acts the way that they act, and and how they feel about a certain situation. So to speak on it, the article "The Legacy of a Generational Trauma" by Amish Yadav was a very interesting article to read, and it stood out for me. Now, it's not to say that any other article that I read had bad information. This information just stuck out the most for me in this subject. But you may be asking yourself, what is generational trauma? And generational trauma is trauma that has been passed down from generation to generation, and it can continue to be passed from this current generation and on to the next, on to the next, and on to the next. Generational trauma is something that we develop from birth. It could be developed from birth, but it also could just be developed living and, just being a human, just seeing things that is traumatic to us, or just it could be built into our brains from past generation relaying information on to us. In a sense, generational trauma is a cause of mental illness. And if you don't believe me, the quote from the article, it says that effects the effects of trauma can be passed from one generation to another, including the following: dissociation, anxiety, and other mental health disorders. One reason for how traumatic effects are passed on to future generations is that a history of trauma increases the likelihood of developing mental health issues. These influence how individuals interact with the world and others. In general, people have the most intense and long-lasting interactions with family members. Hence, the consequences of mental health issues are the most evident in these relationships. Basically saying you have a tight relationship with your father or your mother, your brother, sister, cousin, nephew, or anything like that. You spend the most time with them. Hence, them being a family member, because it's family. If it was a friend, it could also come from a friend, but we're talking about generational trauma here. So generationally, basically dealing with your own family member that you deal with almost every day as soon as you come home. Those interactions that you have with your mother or your father or a family member, just in general, they can have a traumatic scar on you, whether they do a physical action or just say something how they state, and they just tell it into you when you had a bad situation that you had just went through. And it could also, damage you in the future as well, because if you experience this trauma back then, you're going to carry this trauma with you, and it's going to mess up your future generation, because it's not like it's going to be a simple thing. One example of it could be teen pregnancy. Now, to bring this in, is kind of like with teen pregnancy. Back then, people were getting pregnant at a young age, and now in this generation, they're trying not to get pregnant at a young age. But at the same time, through generational trauma, it's not going to just stop like that. It's going to have to take a full effect, and we have to break it in order to stop teen pregnancy. Hence, you know the reason why it was so common back then is because there was no birth control or abortion or plan B's back then. But now we have those tools. Even though some people may not agree with it, to break generational trauma, we kind of have to mold our future generation to being comfortable, and also being comfortable to open up about it, and not being able to shut our future generation out and leaving them in the dust.